and I'm cold to the core. I swear I can't remember what my life was like before. I got the music in me, knew it simply had to be my destiny. I'm blessed to be the best within my CNHEND. Please believe not Ninja Gaiden. I'm not the guy to fight with them lightning. They come in dumb and I leave them enlightened.
What's up, my wizards? It's Dev. From Mtg, we like magic, and today I've got a classic deck for you with a bit of a twist. Don't worry, you'll know when you see it. I'm sure you'll probably comment about it, but in any case, I'm actually super excited to bring you this list because it works. This is classic mono white aggro, sort of. Remember back in the day when we used to call these decks White Weenie? Unironically. Like, nobody does that anymore because it sounds really stupid and slightly dirty, but even though the name has changed, this is very much a classic mono white aggro deck. And I don't think we have to wait for Dominaria to come out where we get some cool white aggro pieces to actually build this. I think we've got plenty of stuff in the format right now. The thing is, though, if you want to make mono white aggro work in this format, you have to get a little bit creative. We'll get to that when we get to it, but first, I'm going to start off basic here by showing you a creature that you know we're going to play. Let's play 4 copies of Sky Marcher Aspirant, why don't we? 2 power white 1-drop, so it's just an automatic playset in our white aggro deck, and this is maybe one of the best 2 power white 1-drops of all time. You know, once we hit a sin, she can start flying over for damage, which is great in this deck. And you know, if it's not interacted with, Aspirant puts way more points up on the scoreboard for you than a lot of 1-drops will. You know, a lot of 1-drops start to lose relevance around turn 3 or 4, but Aspirant's the opposite. Turn 3 or 4, when we hit a sin, she starts getting even better than the first turn we played her. So you can't say that about a lot of 1-drops. She can put up a lot of damage for you. Moving right along, we got a lot of 1-drops to go through, so let's keep things going with 3 copies of Snubhorn Sentry. So that's 2 cards with Ascend, and I've only shown you 2 cards, but that's not the twist. It's that false alarm on the twist. That's not it. It's crazier than that. In any case, Snubhorn Sentry, don't snub it. You have to make that joke. It's so bad. But in any case, don't turn your nose up at Snubhorn Sentry. This is actually a crazy card. Well, the way we've got things drawn up here, you can actually hit a sin by turn 3 somewhat easily. You know, more likely you're going to hit it on turn 4, but those are key turns for this deck. You know, on turn 3 or 4, you'll hit a sin, you'll actually get the power boost on Snubhorn, and you'll start flying over with Sky Marcher and just dealing crazy damage. I don't want to play all 4 copies of this because I usually don't want it on turn 1. Usually you want to play this on turn 3 alongside a 2-drop or even 2 other 1-drops if you really want to hit a sin that bad. But starting the next turn on turn 4, this thing can swing in for 3, and you only, you know, it only costs you 1 mana to do that, which is a pretty great investment. So even though it's not the best 1-drop creature on turn 1, it is great when you get it with a cluster of other creatures on turn 3 or 4, and it basically turns itself on. Now, to help us hit a sin super early, we're going to play 3 copies of Legion's Landing in the deck, and you can probably push it to 4. Honest, if you really wanted to. It's not the most powerful creature in terms of, like, you know, raw PT numbers or anything like that, but it can help you hit a sin really easily because that's essentially 3 permanents on turn 1. The land, Legion's Landing itself, and the creature it gives you. So it gets you almost a third of the way to Ascend on your first turn. That's insane. So this is a great way to help us get there. And it's also really, really easy to flip over this card. Again, a ton of 1-drops in this deck and a bunch of 2-drops too. So you're going to be swinging with a bunch of creatures on turn 3 and 4 most of the time. You can flip over landing very easily. At that point, it gives you long game, lets you grind out a game by making a dude every single turn. That's pretty awesome. It can help stave off mid-range and other aggro assaults by giving you a lifelink dude to chump block with. And it can also be great against control because it just gives you a never-ending creature factory that they can't, like, counter or anything. So, like Legion's Landing is at least a 3-up, definitely. Even before it's flipped over, it helps with a sin, but once it does flip over, it's crazy. And, by the way, it's ramped, so it helps push down the land count. There's so many ridiculous things about landing. But to even further aid with getting Ascend in the early game, we're going to play a couple of copies of Cartouche of Solidarity. Because basically, as long as we have another creature out, which is fairly easy to do in the early game in this deck, then this is just a 1-mana creature, essentially. We just have to have another creature to play it. This is just fantastic in this deck specifically, where it gives us more board presence and a boost to a probably small dude, and, you know, money towards our Ascend count. So we got to play at least a couple of copies of it. Now this is where things start curving left, but they haven't gone all the way left yet. We're going to play 4 copies of Toolcraft Exemplar. Now Aspirant might be the biggest, like, natural white 1-drop right now, but this is the biggest potential white 1-drop, so we can't resist the urge to play this thing. You know, getting 3 power out of this by turn 2 is a ridiculous deal. You know, anybody that's ever played Mardu Vehicles, or any Vehicles deck for that matter, red-white, can tell you that getting this on turn 1 into any artifact on turn 2 is ridiculous damage output. You know, it's very tough to deal with the nut draw of a deck like Mardu Vehicles. And we actually have the ability to create a similar nut draw in this deck, but be way more consistent as far as the mana is concerned. But here we go. Hold on to your butts. We're also going to play 4 copies of Bombat Courier in this deck.
What a twist!
Now this looks weird, right? But the deck can make red mana, and we need artifacts for Toolcraft Exemplar. We've got more than just this, don't worry. And white aggro has always, since 1993, had the problem that it can't really fill its hand back up once it runs out of cards. And since we're playing like so many 1-drops, our curve stops at 2 in this deck. We're gonna run out of cards like just as fast as a mono red aggro deck that's trying to empty its hand for Hazoret. So we run out of cards quickly. So a card like Bombat Courier, we can just pluck right out of mono red aggro, and sometimes this will give us 2 or 3 cards once we run out of cards, which is super valuable in an aggro deck to get a mid-game refill like this. Not only that, but actually casting the card doesn't tax the mana base at all. Any single land in the deck can cast this card on turn 1, and it'll get some early damage in for you, 2-3 early damage, draw you a couple of cards when you run out of cards. Just Bombat Courier is as good as it's always been, and we can activate it in this deck, so why not play it? Why not play one of the best 1-drops in the whole format? We're actually not done getting freaky, so I hope you haven't commented yet. We're going to play 4 copies of Scrappy Scrounger in this deck, too. But we can also make black in this deck, just so you know. But in any case, we're also a little bit jealous of black aggro and like red-black aggro's ability to play a really resilient creature that can give control these huge headaches, cost them more than 1 card to kill over the course of a game. We can't do that so much, and we want to be able to, so why not just play Scrappy, Same difference as Bombat Courier. We have the black mana to activate this card, but we'll always be able to cast it. Nothing's stopping us from casting this card, so why not play it? It's one of the best aggro creatures in the format, and we won't need the black mana until a little bit later into the game anyway. So if it's, turn 5 or 6, we need the black to get this back into play. We've probably got it by then. And by the way, playing Scrap Heap also gives us access to the old 1-2, the Toolcraft into Scrap Heap on turn 2 play, which can, on the next turn, you'll have done 9 damage to them before they played their 3rd land. That's just not even fair. That's one of the craziest things you can do in a Mardu Vehicles deck, and we ported it over to this list. We still do that without ever having to actually have black mana. So yeah, Scrap Heap goes in. Now, you may have guessed this, considering you've seen both Toolcraft and Scrap Heap, but we're also going to play 3 copies of Heart of Kiran in the deck. And by the way, not only do we have those dudes that always crew Heart of Kiran, they're known for, Toolcraft Exemplar is the best Heart of Kiran pilot on the plane right now. But in any case, we've also got Snubhorn Sentry once we hit a sin to help crew Heart of Kiran. That's sometimes really relevant too. Between Sky Marcher Aspirant and the Heartbreak Kid, we've got more flying in Game 1 than most aggro decks do, so that really helps us race. Julie's here now. She came to say hi, but anyway, moving along. We're going to play 4 copies of Servo Exhibition in the deck as well, because it does so much here. This contributes to our Ascend count in the early game and helps us activate Toolcraft Exemplar as early as turn 2. We can turn it on and start swinging. So lots of cool stuff about Servo Exhibition, and it's a board and a card. 2 guys for 2 mana is actually pretty sweet. There are some decks that this will almost force a sweeper against in the format, like the blue-white approach decks. If you get this on turn 2, they sort of have trouble with it sometimes. So there's just so many cool things that Exhibition does. And to finish off the creatures, we'll play 4 copies of a Donto Vanguard in the deck too. I have just really grown to love a Donto Vanguard, if you haven't noticed. If you're building an aggressive white deck in this format, this is just a perfect 2-drop creature. Forces damage through, really tough to deal with, can't be hit by most sweepers. Again, it's got the Settle the Wreckage problem, but most sweepers aren't going to ever hit this thing, and it makes blocking really tough for the opponent. You might have to pay 4 life, but they're going to lose their guy, and sometimes it is well worth it for you to spend 4 life to be up on board presence. There are actually a lot of times your opponent won't actually bother blocking this or doing anything about it because they know it's going to cost you 4 life, but they also know you'll be more than happy enough to trade that life. So he often won't do much about it, and he'll just put 9 to 12 on the scoreboard for you. Just in case you haven't been keeping track here, and I wouldn't blame you, that is 35 different quote-unquote creatures in the deck. They don't all have like the word creature in the type line, but they all create creatures or can become creatures or blah blah blah. So the only non-permanent card that we're going to play in this entire deck is Pride of Conquerors, but we're going to play a playset because it is well worth it. This card is insane, and it's kind of the whole reason to build a really fast mono-white Ascend deck. Trust me, this thing is unbelievable and sometimes worth casting even if you don't have Ascend yet, because it's a combat trick. The instant speed is really the key to this, you know? You don't have to play it until after your opponent has chosen blocks, or after you've chosen blocks and your opponent swings in. This thing can really take people by surprise. No one expects the Spanish Inquisition or Pride of Conquerors. Now, this is another reason why turn 4 is such a key turn for us. We want to turn on Ascend on turn 3 or on turn 4 with a 1 or 2 mana card and still have enough mana left over to cast Pride of Conquerors on that turn and get in for often lethal, you know, but again, wait until your opponent makes blocks. It's instant speed. Blow them out with Pride of Conquerors, because even if you don't kill them that turn, chances are that they made blocks in such a way that you'll keep some dudes and they'll lose some dudes they did not count on losing. Seriously, the blowout potential is super high, even relatively early in the game with the Pride of Conquerors. Like, after you hit Ascend, if you get this on turn as early as turn 4, this can translate to something like 8 power relatively easily, and God forbid you get it in the late game. It's a ridiculous top deck long after you've already activated City's Blessing and you've had it for a few turns. You know, you get this on turn 7 or 8 and you've got a relatively full board and a stalemate. This thing can equate to like 16 power somewhat easily. So that is well worth your 2 mana, especially at instant speed. And it does cooler stuff even than that sometimes, or at least more tech stuff, you know. Like if you play this and you've got Ascend, this will let your like Legion's Landing tokens or your Cartouche of Solidarity tokens crew a Heart of Kiran. Now, that frees up your guys that would normally crew Heart of Kiran to swing in along with it, like Toolcraft Exemplar, Scrap Heap Scrounger. These are now 5 power, and you don't have to waste them crewing Heart of Kiran anymore. And that can make a difference too. All I'm saying is don't sleep on it. There's a reason I covered this card last. Yeah, it's the only like non-permanent or non-creature making card in the deck, but there are other reasons. I really wanted to hammer home how ridiculous this card is, and you should not play any fewer than 4 copies of it. But I'm sure you want to see our lands. So here they are. We're playing 21 of them. We've got 8 different ways of producing either red or black. And the good thing about that is of course, we can just play the creatures early on in the game, and with Bombat Courier, we usually won't need to use its ability until like turn 4, turn 5, sometimes even later than that. We'll want to pop off a Bombat Courier, so that gives us plenty of time to find our red source. Same thing with Scrap Heap, you know, we usually don't want to reanimate it until, you know, starting turn 4, turn 5, and later on in the game. So it gives us plenty of time to find the black source. And red and black are the perfect colors to play in a white-based aggro deck because we get both of the fast lands. You know, we get lands that do produce different colors than white, but they also won't trip us up in the early game by coming into play tapped or requiring a basic of one of their kinds or anything like that. So this is just the easiest way to play, you know, an all-white deck that also gets to play other colors is by adding red and black. Marty Vehicles has already had plenty of success with this idea. We're just sort of another take on that idea. Instead of, you know, playing Unlicensed Disintegration, red removal, and black cards in the sideboard and stuff, we're just going to go as consistent as we possibly can here, make 20 different white sources, you know, and then just play very sparing red and black in the deck. Now here's our sideboard. We're more or less committed to not playing red or black cards in this deck. You know, I'd really like to play Duress. I'd really like to play a Braid or something, but I think with the mana base that we've got, it just wouldn't be consistent enough, especially considering things like those we want to play at least somewhat early on in the game, and we just don't have the sources to reliably do that. So we're going to stick with white, and we've got some options. We do get Fragmentize, which I'll be honest, I don't side in very often. This is very good against Heart of Kiran, a few other choice artifacts in the format, but it doesn't kill Godfarer's Gift. The only reason we're playing is because it only costs the 1 mana, and we want to use our mana as efficiently as possible. We don't want to play something like Forsake the Worldly that costs us our entire turn. We want to play Fragmentize on top of another card or two. I'll also introduce you to Demystify. I mean, obviously, you've seen the card before, you know it exists, but not a whole lot of sideboards play this thing. But I actually think that Demystify is getting a little bit more relevant. You know, just like with Fragmentize, I don't want to play a card like Forsake the Worldly. That costs 3 freaking mana. Like, no card in the main deck even costs 3 mana. So I just don't want to spend 3 mana on not playing a permanent, right? So, you know, those cards are out. But Demystify, I think, gets in. It's only 1 mana, and it kills a lot of important enchantments. You know, Ixalan's Binding, Cast Out, Baffling In, notwithstanding. This also kills Anointed Procession and a couple of other things. Enchantment, like Hidden Stockpile. You know, enchantments are becoming a little bit more popular because they're one of the toughest things to actually kill in this format. It's fairly reliable to play enchantments as opposed to artifacts or creatures. So Demystify is becoming actually a little bit more relevant day by day. Actually, Vampire Zeal is pretty relevant on our vampires, but it's still pretty good against, you know, aggro decks as a combat trick. On our non-vampire creatures sometimes. And this will also help us push through damage in a race against other aggro decks too. So I went with this over Moment of Triumph, although you could play it too, because we're basically just trying to beat aggro. I just think that the ability to get first strike and actually kill one of their creatures and make one of ours stay alive is a little bit more relevant than 2 life against aggro. You also see the Thopter's Arrest. A lot of aggro decks, especially mono-red aggro decks, are going to, you know, side into a mid-range strategy against us. They're going to bring in Glorybringers, more Chandras and stuff. And although this doesn't do anything against a Chandra, it is an answer to Hazaret, Rekindling Phoenix, the Scarab God against other decks. It's a way to, you know, get on top of something like Torrential Gearhulk too. And it exiles other artifacts. It does what a thing like Fragmentize can't do. You know, it takes out Godfarer's Gift. They will get 1 trigger out of it, or 1, you know, use of it. But you will be able to take it out for the low cost of 3 mana. I think that's why it beats a card like Cast Out or Ixalan's Binding. We really don't have a whole lot of hope of consistently getting to 4 mana before turn 5 or 6 in this deck, so I'd much rather play Thopter Arrest because getting to 3 mana is way more reliable. But there is another 3-drop. You see the Aethersphere Harvester there, yet another trick against aggro. Note that we're doing a lot of work against aggro in this sideboard. That's because we're not quite as good of an aggro deck as a mono-red aggro deck is, but we go way underneath everything else. You know, we go underneath mid-range decks like Grixis, we go underneath control decks like Approach and Blue-Black, but we have problems in the mirror match, or against other aggro decks at least, so we need a lot of help. And Aethersphere is fantastic against mono-red aggro. Against the decks that do run Rekindling Phoenix, this can block it all day, and against the decks that don't, this can get in damage all day. It can also block a Glorybringer without dying and get crewed by anything in the entire deck, and get us some life back to help win a race. Aethersphere is ridiculous. And here are your power rankings. A final score of 65. That's a pretty competitive score for a deck that costs what it does. I'll let you know in just a second, but honestly, I'm pretty happy with that score, especially considering the stuff we do poorly, we don't really care about. You know, versatility, we don't care. We're turning them sideways. Defense is low, who cares? We're turning them sideways. We're trying to eat your face. And this deck actually has some advantages. You know, it fills the board even faster than a deck like Mono Red Aggro can, but it still gets access to a mid-game refill, like Bombat Courier, just like Mono Red does. And its creatures are a little bit dinkier than some aggro decks, yes, but it still gets access to mid and late game resiliency with Scrappy Scrounger. Like, we're sacrificing some things to get those advantages, but we're not actually sacrificing much considering we still get to play Courier and Scrap Heap and help shore up those weaknesses. You want to talk about explosive starts? Man, this deck is 0 to 60, faster than just about any deck in the format. This thing gets in damage very, very quickly, and again, fills up the board very fast. This deck more or less demands a sweeper against anything slower than Mono Red Aggro, and they won't always have it. And even if they do, you got ways to come back from it. So I really like this thing. It feels like playing a traditional, super fast, drop your hand, mono white weenie deck, but it does still have some advantages that the decks of old did not necessarily have. So try this thing out. I know it looks wonky. I'm fully aware that it looks weird to play Bombat Courier and Scrap Heap Scrounger in a mono white aggro deck, but I'm telling you, give this thing a test drive. You will like it. And if you are interested in that, the deck actually doesn't cost that much. It's about $115 to build this deck on TCG Player right now. It's not necessarily budget by any means, but $115 ain't half bad either. You know, sometimes when I put together decks that are like $150, $170, I don't feel too bad about that budget. So $115 is not that much to ask for a deck that's actually really competitive against a good portion of the format right now. So if you're interested in trying this thing out, as always, click the first link in the description. That'll take you over to TCG Player, my sponsor. They help me out. They help the channel out, so I hope you'll help them out. They're the cheapest place you can get this deck online right now. Some places, this deck is like $150, $170. That's not actually that much. I've already talked about that. But if you want to play as little as possible for this deck, head on over to the link in the description and check out TCG Player. And I sincerely hope you try this one out. At least proxy it up if you don't want to spend the money. I'm serious. I believe in this deck. This is the most fun I've had with an aggro deck in a really long... It feels good having fun playing aggro again. Let me say that. Moderate aggro has ceased to be fun at this point. It's just sort of a by-the-numbers thing. It felt good actually having fun playing an aggro deck again. So try this thing out if you want to, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure you like the video. Helps me out, puts me in more recommended feeds, do all that stuff. Subscribe to the channel if you're new, this is your first time seeing me, or even if it's your 200th time seeing me and you haven't subscribed yet, probably about time. So sub, hit the bell for the notifications. Follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev for witticisms and to know when decks are coming out. Or, conversely, you could throw me $1 a month. $1 a month on patreon.com/SBMTG. Link in the description if you're interested. And I'll let you know what decks we're doing 24 hours before I upload them. So do that if you're interested. And I think I'm tapped out for now. Pretty sure that's all for this one. I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.